having conversations that are meant to benefit us all. We're discussing the hot topics in communication with some subject matter experts, and hopefully we'll get information that we can use. I'm Anka Will, and joining me will be Symon de Nobriga, Minister with responsibility for communication in the Office of the Prime Minister, who is leading the charge to create environments that fortify the relationship between government and media and ultimately help our public to become a more informed society. This morning, to continue the discussion, we're also joined by some familiar faces, usually on the other side of the camera, as he says. This morning, Mr. Sampson Nanton, the Deputy Managing Editor of Guardian Media Limited, joins us, bringing with him over 28 years of experience and, of course, all of the insight that we can use on examples of misinformation and disinformation. Now, Mr. Nanton has worked with a number of media houses and therefore will be able to give us a well-rounded perspective, if you will, as well as many of the teachings and lessons that he's learned on the field as well. To round up the conversation, if you will, we are joined by Managing Director of Reputation Management Caribbean, Lisa Ann Joseph. She has had many years in the realm of reputation management, over 30 to be specific, and is a communication specialist specializing in guiding executives and teams through communication challenges. We can certainly use some of that expertise when dealing with the matters of mis and disinformation. And so, ladies and gentlemen, good day and welcome again.
Thank you.
Before we get started with making the distinction between misinformation and disinformation, I think it's important, Minister, to have you give a little context as to why these sorts of conversations are not just important, but useful. How are they useful? And why is it that you are so committed to this charge?
So again, thanks, Anka. And of course, welcome to the panel joining me as well. I think that in the recent past, disinformation and misinformation is not only an issue that we have to treat with in Trinidad and Tobago, but it's a global issue. And it falls very nicely in the conversations that we've been having in this series. Of course, we've spoken about the what we commonly refer to as new media, and we've talked about those platforms themselves and in and of themselves being benign. The platforms are there to be used or misused. And I think that we are seeing these platforms, while they can be used and are being used for entertainment, for businesses to utilize as a tool in their own business strategy, but also as a tool for communication, for education. And with that opportunity to use is also, as I said, the opportunity to misuse. And I think that any government that is serious, as we are, about having an informed society wants to ensure that these platforms, with the way that disseminate information so widely and so quickly, are also being used responsibly. So part of that is also equipping the persons who utilize it, not only to put information forward, but also to consume that information, to understand that they themselves, sometimes unwittingly, can fall prey to disinformation and then can be a purveyor of misinformation. So it is important that we have this conversation. It's important that not only from a governmental and policy position, that we also bring to the conversation subject matter experts and persons who are in the field, quite frankly, fighting it as well. So yeah, I think it's very important that we have this, and I want to thank you for leading the conversation.
Well, I may have my own personal reasons, having been in part of the conversation myself, but we'll get to that. Sure. Because I think it's important, as you've made the distinction in the use of words, there is a difference between misinformation and disinformation. So, Mr. Nanton, if you can make the distinction and perhaps Lisa add to it so that we have a clear understanding of how to use these words.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. The disinformation is something that people often confuse, as you mentioned, with misinformation. Clearly, it's something that is deliberately put out. It's meant to create a narrative, to give someone either an advantage or maybe create a disadvantage for someone else. Sometimes to create mischief. Most times it's ready to sort of persuade the population or the person who you are going to be reaching in a certain way. And that is put out very calculatedly. In the case of mischief, we've seen many examples of it, which we probably will get into a little later, as opposed to misinformation, which is really just information that has been put out. Quite frankly, it could be put out in the best of intentions, but the information at some point was wrong, and people are consuming wrong information, not because of somebody's deliberate plan, which distinguishes the two, misinformation on one end and someone's disinformation being spread on the other.
Right. So we can think of it as the D is in disinformation, it's more deliberate, while the misinformation might be a mishap.
Yes.
I'm getting there. The distinction is important because we have the conversations, and with the advent and access to the platforms, everybody and their mother wants to be some sort of speaker, even if they're not aware of how to speak. Now, Lisa, you'll be able to give us a little bit more insight on exactly that, because we are covering countering disinformation. But let's talk a little bit about the impact thereof. You would see it firsthand from clients, whether it be after the fact or even being able to identify it beforehand. Mm-hmm. What does that look like, or how do we, the average man on the street, utilize some small techniques to counter disinformation?
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple things that you have to look at. If you think of it from the intent, what was the intent of the communication that you want to put out? If the intention is malicious, if it's to create actions that may be deceptive, that's clearly the disinformation. If the intent is to put out information that helps message or seeds messages when you move along, and it is carried organically but may be misinterpreted, then it could be misinformation. How do I see it? I see it a lot, especially I operate in the private sector space, and I've been doing this for such a long time. And now with COVID, after COVID has happened, we are so attuned to information. We are in that age where information is in the palm of our hands. So as the people who, or the organizations or the entities that put out the information, you want to ensure that the intention is genuine, that you really want people to get the accurate information, you want people to get the facts, you want people to believe in who you are and what you're about, as opposed to those who provide the disinformation where the intention is to deceive. So it doesn't happen with just in the public sector. It happens across the board. And more entities, institutions, government agencies, private sector organizations have to really circle back internally and determine what is the intent of our initial communication. And I think it has to start from there.
That's a good place to start. A lot of times you consume things, as you were mentioning, for entertainment and frivolously. So thinking of what is the purpose of the content actually will help to decipher what you should and shouldn't engage with. We have examples though, and sometimes we have very short-term memories. So off the top of your head, perhaps Sampson, you can lead the charge there. Some magnificent examples of deliberately putting out improper information to deceive us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have my own personal examples, and I think it helped me in a great way. I mean, if you look generally, there are examples every day. Quite frankly, just a few days ago, I was looking at the Olympics, and there was a story of Sampson withdrawing $1 billion from the Olympics. And I jumped at it because it was over the opening ceremony. It didn't agree with some part of it. And when you did the check, you realized this was not true. And it was not a misinformation sort of scenario. It was someone deliberately putting that out because there was a controversy over the way the opening went. But I do recall when I got into the media in 1996 as a cub reporter, as I call myself. Soon after, I think it's, I say soon, but in 2020, I was sent to Tobago to cover the elections there. And I do remember a very, very good source, someone who I had relied on for proper information before, coming to me and giving me a piece of information. And I can say it's past now, but at the time, the UNC was moving into Tobago to campaign for the local government election there at the Tobago House of Assembly election. And there was this party called the PEP, the People Empowerment Party, led by Deborah Moore-Miggins. And this very reliable source called me and said that they were having negotiations. I did not buy it initially. I couldn't understand why. And I went on and on asking for information to verify it. I couldn't get the information. The meeting went late into the night, and we were going to press. And because I had trusted this source so much, I decided to go with the information. Obviously, it was wrong. So we had to correct it the very next day. But it was such a good learning lesson for me, because here is someone who isn't just a flippant source that comes with information, it's someone who had been feeding you very, very good information. And it had been that had he been able, which he did, to get this narrative that there was this sort of partnership going on, he felt that he would strengthen his side, his party's side of the election. Did that deter me or did that depress me? It did. But did it strengthen me? It absolutely did.
Right.
And you know, as journalists, getting these experiences, it puts you on a path that you are able to look for things in a much better way and ensure that your sources are impeccable all the time. Not once, not twice, not historically, every single day.
Now, Minister, when we say election, I know your eyebrow will perk up, but that is not even surprising in the case of being fed, well, misinformation altogether. There's a deliberate and obvious agenda there. I have the trouble from my own experience of trying to determine what was the purpose of me being the subject of fake articles as well. In your experience in that particular instance, this would have been a face-to-face encounter. There perhaps would have been other things you could have looked at, apart from trying to verify the source. Body language, other small details. In today's world of clickbait, it is much more complex. In this particular example, where I am the subject of an article that alleges that Central Bank is about to sue me, the headline is made to look, well, first of all, attention-grabbing with me being sued. My image is there, pictures from social media, and the website that it's supposedly on looks like that of one of our daily news. So if I were an average citizen looking at this, it seems legit. I'm going to open it up and I'm going to run with this story easily. How do we counter that, Lisa? Any advice therein? Not just in terms of being subject to it, because that's an entirely different conversation, but as somebody consuming these sorts of things, how do I treat with it? How do I decipher what I can take and can't take? And when I start to determine that it is in fact disinformation, not an error, but deliberate, what next?
So there's two sides to it. You, as the subject matter in this situation, what do? You have to now act quickly. You have to determine whether you need to say something, state on social media that this is happening and this is not me. So it's two sides. Those who are the subject matter of the disinformation, and those who are the receivers of the disinformation. What do they need to do? They need to understand what the reality is, what the environment that we're in, and know that not everything that you see on social media or legacy media, because that, let's not neglect that part of it. There's the traditional media too that would promote disinformation as well. Sorry, Sampson. but it's a fact.
Facts are facts.
So when you look at media across the board, as receivers of the information, you have to now determine what is facts and what isn't. Now, how do you do that? A lot of it has to do with the person or the institution putting out information on a regular basis. And if you know that the the institution or the person, has certain morals and certain integrity issues, then what will be true and what will not be true, because there's a pattern, there's a cadence of information coming out that is accurate, that is continuous, so that you can understand that this seems a little off.
Right.
This is against the rhythm. This is against the cadence. Something is weird here. Let's stop for a moment. Let's not press forward. Let's not press send. Let's not share and all these things or retweet or anything. But stop for a moment and really ask the question, is this really from this particular entity? And should I believe it? And so it goes from both sides.
Right. Now, when we talk about the examples, and we luckily see sometimes persons taking the time to realize this isn't legitimate and saying as much, it lends itself to the notion of a more informed society, self-regulating, as you've mentioned before. But ultimately, when we have media houses, bloggers that are trusted, other sources coming with information that will impact society's response to things, we have to consider the threat to possible governance altogether. What is the impact of these sorts of instances to the democracy of Trinidad and Tobago, Minister?
I think that's a 45-minute minimum conversation.
Right.
It's interesting in hearing your own experience, Sampson's experience, and of course, Lisa's. I remember the Prime Minister being also the subject of that sort of scam.
Right.
To Sampson's point, now that we have these platforms, in 2000, you said it was, that access wasn't available to the source. Now, what you have is the source is not even coming to you. The source may go directly to a platform. Yes. The source may either be named or hide behind a third-party platform where there is no name, face. It's just being put out there, and we see so much of that being done. From a political perspective, you are correct. It is very difficult for us. I mean, we have that challenge basically every Monday morning, because you may have a press conference that happens on a Sunday. You may have a Monday conversation that is happening, and the most outlandish statements are made. And quite frankly, I then have to get calls from reporters who are asking me to verify it. Now, the issue is, one, I'm not the only person getting that call, but two, in the verification process, you're also giving legs to the disinformation. So there's a constant battle almost every morning, and probably not almost every morning, where you have to juggle what requires addressing. Where should we address this? How should we address this? The issue as well is just a simple proliferation, because a single person can operate across myriad platforms as myriad people. So in there lies the challenge, of course, as a government, where you have to speak in a timely fashion but be responsible, where the person who is making the allegation has absolutely no anchoring in responsibility, or, of course, with fact. So it does become a real challenge. And it is not only government. Quite frankly, it is institutions. It is the media. It is anything that is designated authority. And it is not only our problem. We are seeing this information across the world. We only have to look north to see the impact on governance, on democracy, and on elections. Where does that play? Now, quite frankly, I don't think that as a responsible government, and I think I can say this with certainty, our focus is not on a date. Our focus is on an informed population. If the population is informed, then I think they will make the best chances. They will make the best decisions. However, on top of this level and proliferation of disinformation, and I would really like, Lisa, you in particular, but also Sampson, because you have algorithms that work in a certain way and operate in a certain way on the various platforms, very often the reply to that disinformation never reaches the person who has gotten the disinformation in the first place. And it really becomes a challenge how we do that, and strategies that you have to employ in order to counter not only the disinformation, but also the way in which the platforms work that simply will not push the corrective statements
Right.
to the person who is receiving this false information.
Yeah, yeah. And that is the thing about it. You sometimes, your benchmark or your point of success is not necessarily to reach those persons. You have to continuously communicate in the good times and in the bad times, because people expect human interaction. That's the environment that we're in now. It is no longer press release,
Right.
Correct.
documents sending out to media or on social media. It is a combination of press releases and so on, but you have to have someone speaking to the audiences on a regular basis. So you, if your stakeholders are aware that you are communicating regularly, you are communicating factually, they will expect that when the misinformation or the disinformation comes out, that you will respond. But you may not get, because of the algorithms, you may not get to everyone out there. But at least you will capture some of them by your continuous human interaction, because people's attention spans are so short now. Nobody's reading anything. That is why the headlines are always, sensational or captivating, and the headlines are done for a particular purpose, since a long time now. Yeah, so you just push that out, and eventually it will reach a wider audience.
Right.
You are hamstrung as the institution or the company to say as much as you can. You can't. Other individuals can.
Right.
That's the beauty of these people who are, operating with their thumbs and Googling everything. So they have that luxury. As organizations or institutions or agencies, you don't have that luxury. So you have to keep talking to people continuously.
I think at this point it is an interesting example of how the media and the relationship with the government is important, because therein will be the opportunity for the persons who do rely on traditional media and digital media, new media as we were referring to it, to get their information and, as you say, develop that pattern or that understanding of what is reliable, who has been consistent with their delivery, and they themselves be able to self-regulate. It will actually change the algorithm. It will actually change what sort of information comes to them. And then it creates the opportunity for us to perhaps, as the consumer, verify it with the more traditional form of media where, yes, it may take some time to get that source or that information verified, but usually it's tried and true. Right, Nanton?
Yeah, I think the issue of the relationship between the government and the media is that they ought not to be in bed with each other. I know that's not what you're suggesting, but certainly the issue of information getting out is important. I think one of the factors we have to take into consideration, it's a very key factor, is that the persons who are intent on spreading the false information, they are often more active and more determined because they are seeking to create an advantage or create a disadvantage for someone else. So, you know the old saying that when you are sleeping, that's when the thief is looking to get into your house. He is working the system, looking for the loopholes, actively seeking ways to spread this information. And this is now, you know, as the old saying goes, a lie goes around the world 5 times more than the truth can leave the door. It is a case where the need for eternal vigilance has to be there.
Right.
No one is going to do anyone a favor by saying, hey, we want to know what the government is doing because we just want to know. The government has to be actively putting that information out. And Lisa is very right. The press releases do get to a certain, a certain extent, but the active speaking to the audience goes much, much further. Unfortunately, we do live in a scenario where misinformation and disinformation is beneficial to people during election time, for instance. You want to make sure you get your narrative out. And when that happens, it's the onus that the media has is to check and double check. What happens though is that you have quite a lot of these news conferences and public meetings going live where the information just flows out. What do? Do you wait on the other side to give you their response? Do you go to the other side and get a response? Most times we have to go to the other side and say, hey, we heard this allegation yesterday. Can you clarify this for us? And that is where I'm saying in terms of the proactivity and coming out there and saying, hey, even before the media gets to us, I want to get this information out. But it's really a case of who can counter as fast as, as quickly as possible. And how can you get that narrative shared? Whether it would be as strong as the minister said, whether it's going to be as strong, the defense is as strong as the allegation, that's really up to not just the algorithms, but just the pattern in which people consume media across the country.
And speaking of consumption, there will be some conversation about technology altogether because we're seeing, as you say, look north, we see the AI coming into play and confusing things even more so that the disinformation will continue to be a challenge, an ongoing challenge that we really have to sensitize ourselves to. But Minister, I saw you interject a little bit. Before we move forward, you wanted to add?
Sampson raises a very important point. And I think this is where, coming back to your original question, where we talk about the partnership between government and media. He's absolutely correct. Any government and the media should not be in bed together. I think that doesn't bode well for free expression and free media and an informed society. So I accept the fact that there should be, I suppose, a healthy tension between government and media, as media is pressing to get the information. The government is also speaking in the way that they are bound to speak, releasing the information when they can, speaking about the things that they can speak about, not impacting negotiations, not impacting things that require silence and until such time as a final decision and statement can be made. I do think, however, that very often, and this obviously is not pointed to you, Sampson, this is a general conversation, that the reality of new media has also pushed traditional media to have to respond in order, maybe relevance is a strong word, but in order to maintain their own dominance in the space as a source of information. One of the issues that we very often have is that people don't accept, or they should be accepting more, that the government is also a subject matter expert on the government. So what we see very often is a repetition. We have the whole big lie conversation, right? a repetition. And earlier, Ayinka, you spoke to examples. A perfect example, and I mean, pick up the paper on 3 times a week, you will see this narrative about the government or the Prime Minister saying that the government was not going to shut down Petrotrin. And they utilize 10 seconds or 15 seconds of a clip where he says it. But if you go 60 seconds past that, you will see exactly what the Prime Minister said. Very often, the facts reside in the public domain. The facts have been said, but there is still this conversation about he said, she said. What is the response to this? And I think as we move towards a more informed population, everyone has to accept that in this, we should all be on the same side of the fence. We should all be on the side of the fence that says we are going to ensure that our population is properly informed so that as someone comes to say, well, we remember when the Prime Minister said the government is not shutting down Petrotrin, but no one has a conversation about the Prime Minister saying Petrotrin is an entity that has multiple components to it, and we will look at it. The refinery is a loss-making entity, and we have to address it because we have been multiple governments have kicked this can down the road, and there will always be a time for reckoning. I'm paraphrasing now. There will always be a time for reckoning, and it is incumbent on him as the Prime Minister leading this government at the time to make that hard decision now. These are things, and this is one example. Lisa, you raised the issue of COVID. Lord knows the Minister of Health fought that battle constantly, and we had to look at the way that we were sharing information in order to make that information more palatable. And in there, we did see partnership. Maybe the COVID experience is why we have found ourselves here, because it pushed us so far down, so quickly down the road of the digital age and utilization of these platforms. But I think I just wanted to come back to Sampson, because I think in this, while I agree that there should be this healthy tension, in some instances, we need to see ourselves on the same side of the fence and pushing back against misinformation and disinformation.
If I can just interject there, while I do agree in terms of the creation of a more informed population, we sometimes sit in a place where we see truth as a complete absolute without understanding that people view truth in different ways. And while we are giving people information from one source that may appear to be trusted, and when I say we, I talk just in general, many people may not very much trust that same source or trust the person who is saying it. So if someone would prefer to go away believing the opposite side as opposed to your voice, that really is something that no amount of media coverage can change. That really is on that voice to influence those people in the correct way. The media's job is to present the views of everyone, and of course to do so as best as you can factually. If in fact, as you mentioned, the Petrotrin issue, there is a narrative that is being pushed by one side that this is so and so, we of course seek the other side to get that voice, and we present the two sides, the two voices, as fairly as you can. You will still get that sort of argument that I believe this side, I believe that side, and depending on whose voice stands out more, you find that the narrative is going a certain way. So I don't disagree with you entirely or at all with regards to the creating of a more informed population. But a lot of times that information is really how strongly the voice who's speaking can get that information across.
I suppose we are in the realm of what makes me feel good what is truth, and then simply what is fact.
Fact, right?
Yeah.
Well, the fact remains that what you are talking about from either perspective comes or can be resolved, homogenized, unified under the theme of literacy. What I'm hearing is that we need to make sure that our people are informed, and if we are going to use these forms of new media, these traditional media, and use strategy to employ better actions, we need to understand what we're utilizing. So let's talk a little bit about media literacy, particularly from the standpoint of in the most simple way. We are, yes, talking to practitioners. So we know that ongoing training and refreshing themselves with the changes in new media is absolutely necessary, and in most cases, done. The average man on the street, though, learns about Instagram or Facebook through trial and error and will be really susceptible to a lot of disinformation. What can we do to counter that? How do we face that? Where do we begin as individuals to approach a solution? I'm going to start with the minister primarily because you have had many communications about changes in the media, changes in policy, changes in the way that you operate altogether. So you are already exemplifying it. You are trying to sensitize the public to a government that is far more communicative and accessible than others. So there are already examples. But this is part of your strategy. So tell me a little bit more of it.
I suppose let's start, let's be cohesive in the conversation, right? Lisa touched on something, and it has to do with frequency in which you communicate. And I think that as a starting point has been something that we have achieved. I think that in terms of the Prime Minister primarily opening himself up to real and honest and in-person conversations with the media, ensuring that the information is out there. And yet, Sampson is right, a lot of things do happen live. So I think that is the first space, ensuring that even as we drive media literacy, you're able to anchor that with the information. I think that government communications has been doing a lot of work. One, to improve first the actual ministries themselves in ensuring that they're in the space to speak to the various populations across all platforms. So whether that be new media, I'm not a fan of the term, new media, legacy media, ensuring that is there. And yes, conversations happen like this, where we are driving people to understand the challenges that they themselves will face in the way that they consume information. I think that the ministries are also doing the necessary work. Like everything else, you always want to strive to improve. But they are upskilling their own people across the communications departments in ministries to ensure that, one, they are placing themselves in these spaces to speak directly to general population. A prime example, and something that is very topical, is our Agri-Expo. So we are seeing the Ministry of Agriculture speaking, quite frankly, in a way that 2 years ago that ministry was not speaking and addressing not just what has happened, but what is going to happen. I think that as we do this, a large part of it is going to be more communicative in the platforms. So a big thing for government communications is to ensure that we continue the mantra that communication is a two-way street. Okay. So it is no longer tell and sell. So as we put information out, we also will communicate with people within the threads of those posts, whether they be static, say, media releases or video where we are talking about something that has happened or is not happening.
Right.
We are continuing to upskill and educate our own staff, and I think a big part of this also is in partnering with other entities in order to do exactly what we're doing here, which is to speak about the realities of misinformation and disinformation and to drive legitimate sources of information as primary sources of information,
Right.
and not just the person who throws up a screenshot, puts themselves in front as a talking head in front of it, and espouses an opinion that then is edutainment, but is creating a sense of I am a
Authority.
primary source of information and authority.
Right.
I would like to add to that. Part of the upskilling should also entail the understanding that one message cannot be for all stakeholders.
Absolutely.
You have to understand that messages have to be packaged differently to connect with the various audiences. How you consume media and how you consume media are two completely different ways of doing it. The message, same message, but I'm telling you different to how I'm telling you. And that part of it, I think, and COVID has kind of forced us into that, because during COVID, you found that one message didn't reach everyone. You had to develop infographics. I mean, before COVID, the word infographics wasn't a big thing. It became a big thing because people like graphics and, less copy, more visuals, and infographics became a thing because there are some people that it will resonate with. And there are other people who want hard data and they want the slides and they want the tables and the graphs and all of that. They will consume that different to others. So part of the upskilling, and I do a lot of coaching with corporate communication teams within private sector organizations, and it's sitting with them and for them to understand who are their target audiences and what do you say to those audiences, how do you say it, when do you say it, and the cadence to attach to those things,
Right.
Internal and external, because it varies. So gone are the days where one message pushed out to everybody at the same time in the same way. That is no longer possible. And another point is in terms of the agenda, the agendas between media and in your case, the government, two different agendas. So it's understanding what those agendas are and how government can use the agendas of the media to reach their intended audiences, because the two will never really meet. Let me tell you, it will never really meet. But there is that healthy tension that is required, at that relationship and respect on both sides for the messages to get out.
And Sampson, I'm seeing a message on your face that tells me,
Nodding sagely.
yes, that tells me that you have to add to this, because what we're getting here is stuff that we could use. So
No,
what are you adding?
I'm very much, this is a topic that's dear to my heart because my entry into the media in '96 was prior to cell phones being prominent.
He was old as
Prior
I am.
to, yeah. I mean, you had those big Motorola phones with the antennas and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Clunky
and then even
ones.
in the office, I was at the newsday to begin with. You didn't have internet. You had nothing like that. It was just, it came on after a while. So phones, and what that did, for instance, if I had to cover something on a story on the budget and I had to go back to the old files, I would have to walk up to the library on Knox Street and remember, last year's budget was the 12th of October, so I have to pull out the papers from the 13th of October and go through the Guardian, go through the Express and make my notes. And then, what the year before, because you have to get a few years to see. And you write a story based on those trends. Today you can do that by the click of a finger. And that is where the danger is. What it does, though, it tells you that the core of journalism must never be removed from the picture, because the platforms change, the form of gathering information may change, but the core of journalism cannot be removed, which is you must get the facts and it must be verified. You must go to the right sources. Back then, in getting the info from the newspaper, you knew back then that there was no contamination of information. It would have been as close to factual back then. Now, if I Google something, I don't know if it's a fake news site. I don't know what the information that is being put out there is someone's personal narrative. The issue has always been the consumption patterns that have been changing so rapidly that we cannot keep up with it. And I'll give you an example. We deal with weather systems, quite frankly, quite often during the rainy season as we are now. And I have been looking at the way people are consuming the verified information. Now, what is the verified source of information for a weather system in TNT? It's the TNT Met Service, isn't it? There is a site called TNT Weather Center, who are a group of meteorologists who create this site, and they are putting out info. There's a National Hurricane Center in Miami that is a website with info. And what we are witnessing is people are now actually absorbing these other sites than the Met Office, which is the verified source of information in TNT. Is that a bad thing? I'm not sure. What we have to examine now is why. Why are people saying, well, this is the site I would prefer to choose, and this is the other site I will go to? And what can the verified source in the Met Office do about that in terms of assessing and getting this info out? But to say that, hey, to hold up a press release that says, we are the verified source, you must come to us, doesn't cut it.
Right.
That doesn't change my mind. I may very well have a personal reason why I go to this source. And I think that is how we have to understand that, as Lisa said, not one message meets everybody, but at the same time, not everybody wants to go to that particular source for the information.
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback. One of the underlying sort of mantras that we have at government communications comes back to what you were saying. And we keep saying, we are one message, but many voices. So you cannot speak the same way everywhere. You can't speak to the same to different people in the same way. And each ministry has a way that it will speak because of who its
Public, sir.
its stakeholder, its public, its core public is. And so just to clarify on that, and I do think we touched on it a bit in our last conversation. You're absolutely correct. And that has been part of our upskilling, because what we want to do is, as we combat in the digital space, the fact that there are so many sources for information, and I use that term loosely, what we need to do is to drive the public to trusted sources. And those trusted sources should obviously include the subject matter experts, the media, the government should be seen as a trusted source. But very often, and here is the crux of it, very often the facts are not always what define you as a trusted source anymore. It is now, are you sharing those facts in a palatable fashion across different platforms and towards different demographics.
Yeah, but let's not ignore too that that political affiliation plays a role in it. Whether or not.
Oh, Sampson, you don't want to start me down that road today, you know.
But I do
but
have
it's a
to
very
stop
important
you.
fact. It's a very important fact that people may not see you as a trusted source because of their political affiliation.
But
And whether or not that is actually accurate or correct, you have to navigate that.
Right.
That, you know, my facts are there, they're verified, they're certain, we are putting it out, but people simply do not believe your facts simply because of political affiliations and so forth. And how do you navigate that? Do you say the message 100 times and expect that someone will believe it? And that is something I find that a lot of and I'm not talking about politicians, but a lot of people depending on where they sit, it's difficult for them to understand that the message is getting out, but the message is not being received simply because there are so many barriers between the communication and communication noise. There comes in many different forms.
And what you're touching on, Sampson, is an entirely different episode, because then we look at the actual way that people receive information, the communication challenges, which we actually will continuously have to explore in all of our conversations. But I think that we've gotten some very pertinent strategies and useful things that we can employ as citizens, as members of the media, as governance, to make sure that we are countering disinformation. So I really appreciate that we've at least begun the conversation from an elevated perspective, having had this one. Thank you very, very much for joining me, and hopefully we continue these discussions in a more informal way. When we say thank you very much to our subject matter experts, as this has been Countering Disinformation on Media Exchange.